This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Umay for like the fourth time. You're a composer, writer, musician. You created Beowulf the Musical. You have a lot of other tracks. You have a new album coming out as well.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about your story. We have talked to you before. We actually had you on the PEG Bedroom Producer Festival that we did a couple years back. We're going to try to do that again sometime. But it's always cool to talk to artists that we've talked to in the past, and artists, musicians particularly, are people that we love to talk to on the Ghost Show. So you've been working. You completed like 2 masters that they were talked about before you got on. Medieval Studies, and what's the other one then?
Music composition.
Music composition. So that's awesome. And then I know you've been working on Beowulf for a long time, and you actually got it produced at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2024.
Yes.
So that's awesome. So so how do you pronounce the role of the person you played? Like I don't want to butcher it.
Yeah, so it's Freawaru, which is a character from the poem as well, but it's expanded a bit more on the musical.
You've always been influenced by like Chaucer and Malory and a lot of the great medieval authors. And maybe for our folks that haven't heard you before, why are you interested in that period?
I think for me, it first started with an interest in fantasy literature, which itself draws a lot from medieval literature. I've been a massive fan of Tolkien since I was like 13. And of course, he was a professor of Anglo-Saxon literature. So his works contained a lot of medieval references. And I think it's starting from that, and also this idea that even though these texts are written possibly like 1,000 years ago and in languages that are now dead, and yet there's still the core of it, I think, still stays the same, the humanity of it. And I think it's really fascinating seeing how, humans have always been the same.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. When you read great literature, you read Shakespeare, you read the Odyssey, you read the Iliad, go back and read some of the classic, literature that's, and then you check out stuff from like, Japanese culture or Chinese culture, Korean cultures, African cultures, and you get to like the ancient stuff. To me, the oral histories that got translated into text, that is a real, it's a big pool of information of inspiration. That some people they keep on doing, King Arthur all the time. Or they copy the Iliad, but there's other things you could get inspired by. You don't have to stay within the same framework. A modern culture likes to repeat a lot of things, so it's interesting when people pick a different reference point.
Yeah, I think especially like what you said with King Arthur, that is one of the mythologies that is always expanded upon, and I think it is one that really allows for that. But there's a lot more out there. It's just that what gets popular changes, I guess. But yeah,
I think it's interesting. So your musical influences, you've always been like, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Miranda and Mitchell, and so like in that frame, do you think in the modern world, I believe there's a place for every genre. I think if you put something out in the ether, people will gravitate toward it. Did you ever have people say, well, maybe you should not do that? Or you just felt like, I'm going to do what speaks to me?
Yes, I think definitely with medieval literature, and specifically with something so particular in terms of the time period that I'm interested in, which is the Anglo-Saxon period. It's one where, I've had people who have never heard of Beowulf before. I've had people who are maybe such a big fan of Beowulf that they think it should never be adapted, it should never be touched, it is holy, you don't do that. But I think at the end of the day, it's these stories are made to be told, and that was what they did in the medieval period as well. These stories would go through changes the more they were told, and I think it's almost, it is a continuation of that storytelling tradition that I'm now trying to, bring back through Beowulf the Musical.
I think it's really interesting in an age of like AI and
Mm,
all this automation that when you dive into like classical form, like actual you know music that has movement music that
yeah.
is relatively not like throwaway music. I feel like today there's a lot of what I would refer to as like junk food music, music that doesn't really
Mm,
tell you a story. It has a groove, it has a beat, it has a repeating line, and it's kind of very superficial. But when you go into something like the depth of like a Beowulf, or you're interpreting
mm.
like classical literature, or even when you have an author, a songwriter that's actually trying to tell like an uncommon story, that
Mm.
sometimes people are like, oh, this is not the age for that. But I think it's the age for anything.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think you can tell any story at any time. I mean, there's always a part of it that is relevant.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like your musical is 2 acts. It's made of like 35 songs. So
Yes.
what's the full length of the whole project when you actually do it
It was 2.5 hours on stage.
on stage? Wow. Did you film it?
Yes, we had filmed it, but I think it's not on YouTube anymore, but it was.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I would have liked it. I missed that. So, like, are you thinking about putting it on some kind of like Blu-ray or getting it back out there?
Maybe. I think at the moment, my main focus is on the album because since the Edinburgh Fringe premiere, I've actually edited quite a bit the script and some of the songs. There's a new song. The Edinburgh version was 34 songs and now it's 35. So I think it's interesting to have that as the sort of what it used to be and
Yeah,
see.
because you're evolving. Because that's
Yeah.
interesting. Because like a lot of jazz musicians don't have a piece, and over time it evolves.
Mm.
And I think a lot of musicians actually do that. Because when you actually see a musician play their song, like when it first came out, and then
Yeah.
over like 5 years, 10 years, like if they keep on playing it, they start changing it. They start evolving it and start like adapting it to like where they are. Because like when
Yeah.
you're like 25 and you did it, or you're 17 and you did your song, by the time you're like, you know, you're on stage or you're 38.
Yeah.
Like how you feel that song is not the same way you felt it when you were 17 or 25.
Yeah, definitely. I think also it's for me it was, I started writing this musical when I was 22. It was the middle of the pandemic. I had never composed for an orchestra before. And it was now I'd finished my music composition masters. I could see everything a lot more clearly, and there were a lot of edits that now that I know better I wanted to make and
Mhm.
just polish it, make it even more cohesive. Yeah, and I think it's that what you said about, the work evolving with the person.
Yeah, I think that's always I always find it interesting because sometimes your fans, they're kind of stuck like where
Mm.
you were when it was like if you have your biggest song and you were like 18, 21, right? And then you suddenly get into your mid 20s or mid 30s, and it's like you're not there anymore, but your fans, they still expect you to do that.
Yeah,
And you
so
and like, okay, well, I have to give the fans what they want, but I still need to sneak in the stuff I want to do. So it's always like a balance. It's like the fans want this. In order for me to get on stage, I have to at least kind of understand that they want to hear who they think I am, right?
yeah.
And I might be where like I'm not where they think I am.
Yeah, I definitely see what you mean because there are some songs where at the time I wrote them, I think I loved them and I still love them, but it's a bit of, well, I'm not exactly that person anymore. So it feels a bit like I'm playing a
Awesome.
part when I perform it. But also it's nice to sort of look back and, see the person I used to be. It's almost like a little hello to past Umay.
Like a flashback, like it's like 'cause songs always trigger memories. Like
Yeah.
once you, as a songwriter, you hear a song, like you have a very specific intention, but once it gets out in the world, your fans can actually interpret it. And a lot of songwriters we run into is like that people don't have the lyrics right at all.
Yeah.
Like, the fans like totally misinterpreted it, and then and you don't want to correct them because they're so into it, and they're like, oh, and if you're sitting there, it's like, well, that's not really what I said, but I don't want to bust their bubble.
Yes, definitely. I think that's even more so with something like a musical, because I'm not the person performing every single song when it's on stage, and some of the songs are written for different performers. And then when I see them perform it, or when I hear the other actors' interpretations of it, sometimes they find things in it that I hadn't realized, I hadn't put in there intentionally. But
Hmm.
I'm like, I see what you mean. I see that interpretation as well, and it's really interesting how,
That's a
yeah.
whole nother level because like if you're a screenwriter or you're a playwright and you give it to the actors, and then the
Yeah.
actors like they interpret it. Now you had your vision, and director, you can say it like this is the way
Mm.
you should go. But still, like the little micro nuances, it's like you can't control what the actor's gonna do every second that they do what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of let go,
Yes, definitely.
and then eventually. So how is it to like let go? How much do you let go with the direction of your projects?
I think there were certain things where I was definitely sure about what I wanted. So if it was something about, being true to the text or the source material, but otherwise I sort of let the actors have free reign a bit with what they took from it. If, for example, if something was left open-ended in the source material, I also left it open-ended in my interpretation, and I said, this is up to you as the actor to decide the backstory for your character, because there is nothing definite in the text. So
Mhm.
I'm happy with whatever you come up with.
I think that's always interesting 'cause, like, when you're a songwriter, if you're writing, like, a primary songwriter and you write for, like, an orchestra, or you write for the band, or then you, like, each person who plays it, like, the bass player,
Mm.
like, the string players, the wind players, you've got the specific, like, material that the charts and the sheets that they're gonna run with, but then every musician interprets stuff, just like the
Mm.
actors, and then,
Yes.
like, and if your primary instrument is not their instrument, like, so you're like, okay, maybe the string section did interpret this a little differently, or
Yeah.
so it's the same kind of thing, right?
Yes, definitely. And I experienced that as well with the orchestra, because I mean, my first instrument was violin, so I was quite confident with writing for the string section, but woodwinds, I had no idea how they worked. I
Mhm.
know they make sound. So that was, there was a lot of working with the orchestra actually as I was arranging it, and sort of getting their feedback on what is possible on their instrument and what is not possible, and also being inspired by what they say they could do,
Mhm.
and saying, oh, this is a thing that I can write for that instrument. That is interesting. Let me add that into the score.
Yeah, I think that's always cool because, like, you think about, like, Beethoven and Bach is, like, how did they know what to give to the orchestra? Like, how did they so it seems like they could just hear it. They knew what the instruments could do. And then you're wondering, like, sometimes, like, if you go and you get trained, like, you've been trained in musical composition, it's still like what if you're not a woodwind, like, 'cause I actually learned, like, clarinet and sax before I got on keyboards. So when I do trills or I try to mimic winds, I kinda have an idea what I think it should be. But if I didn't
Oh,
have that experience, I'm like, well, kinda I guess I'm listening to it and I'm making interpretations, but I don't have the direct experience with the trill, like, that you would have on the mouthpiece. If you actually
mm.
play that instrument, there's a certain feeling or way you do it that if you've done it, you know it. If you don't, you kinda like, well, I'm kinda imagining what it should be.
Yeah, yeah. It's a bit like that, I think, with, and also sort of, having giving them what you've written, seeing what they actually do with it, and seeing where they struggle with it. And it's, and I think even now that I've had this experience with Beowulf, I've had experience working with the orchestra, I've had experience working with a lot of different instrumentalists. there's still so much more to learn because there's still so much out there and so many
Yeah, there's so
possibilities
much
of what you
depth.
can do.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, within an instrument, there's
Yeah.
so much range of what you could do, and so much interpretation, so many different, like, masters that came up with this technique and that
Mm.
technique. Like, what do you want to use that? And then we have so many choices, and it's like sometimes it's overwhelming. It's like what I find, as a synthesist, sometimes I like to deal with like limiting my choices. It's like I'll actually use like an analog like Moog instead of a digital
Mm.
to limit what I can do because it's monophonic. It's not polyphonic. It can't do some of the things the digitals can do.
Mm.
It can kind of stay. It's kind of limited, and then sometimes the limitations of an instrument are actually like what you want.
Yes, definitely. I think having that limitation can also make you more creative in ways that you hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, that's always the rub today because within a DAW, within a digital audio workstation, sometimes you have so many choices that if you
Yeah.
sometimes I like to go back to my analog like old mastering equipment, like
Mm.
analog tape equipment, because it has the capability, but it's limited,
Mm.
and it's limited to like what you can actually do without all this computer help. And
Yeah.
sometimes it leans into maybe more happy accidents, or it leans into allowing you to explore things that you can't just hit the undo button or the redo button. You actually have to go back and replay it. And that's a limitation. He said, "Well, that's gonna slow me down," but it's like, maybe you need to slow it down.
Yes. Yeah. I think with the limitations that sometimes it's this thing of, now that I know that I need to work within these limitations, it's almost because sometimes when you have complete freedom and everything that you can do, it's overwhelming and you don't know where to start. But having that sort of framework really helps, I think.
Yeah, if you're just like, "I'm just gonna be on a piano," it has
Yeah.
one voice. That's what it is. I can't choose 10, 1,000 different types of pianos. I gotta deal with this Steinway or this German piano. I have to just deal with what it is, you know? And I think sometimes like that to me is useful. And just like when you're dealing with the voicings of your orchestra, it's like, okay, this is what they can do. But if you think about kind of like Orson Welles was really famous for Citizen Kane because he did all these camera angles no one had ever seen before, all these like techniques. And when they asked him about it, he said, "Well, I didn't know what I couldn't do."
Mhm.
Because he
Yeah.
wasn't like trained. So sometimes if you don't know what the limitations are, also that's
Yeah.
another cool thing because you don't know what you can't do. So you try
Yeah.
like everything.
Yes, no, I definitely can see that because I think something that I'm sort of balancing as a composer is because a lot of modern compositions are all about pushing the boundaries of what sound you can make with an instrument, what can you make an instrument do, what can you make a voice do, and what a lot of these bigger questions about, well, what is music anyway? And
Mhm.
then while that is fascinating and I think it's definitely something that we need to explore more, it's also when you are trying to write something in that way, where do you even start? Because
Yeah.
if the possibilities are endless, then how do you pick which one is the best? Whereas when you limit yourself a little bit, I think to, for example, just even a key signature, and I have this key signature that is what I'm going to use, and then that limitation can actually bring out more creativity while still being aware that more possibilities exist.
Yeah. If you limit yourself, like, a blues musician, they're in a pentatonic scale. They kind of stay there. That's what they stay in.
Mm.
And it's like, whoa, they keep on doing the same thing, but not exactly. Robert Johnson, Lead Belly, all those guys, they might be talking about going to the crossroads. They might be doing these like typical blues motifs, but how they do it, even if it's in the same scale and it's somewhat, at the high 50,000 foot level, you might think it's the same thing. but when you really listen to it, you're like, well, it's not. Like the individual musician is in a framework of that pentatonic scale, but how they approach it is what makes them a master of what they do, because they can stay in that genre, they stay in that style, but they don't do it. They're not exactly the same. They still have that individuality.
Yes. And I think that's also, with adaptation as well. With, for example, when I was working off Beowulf, that's a text that has existed for 1,000 years and possibly longer as a story, without having been written down. And it's that way of, well, how do I retell the same story, but make it interesting? And also, I can't exactly translate a poem onto the stage because they're two different mediums. So it would never be 100% true to the original anyway. So how do I balance that, being true to the original while at the same time making it a musical?
That is a really interesting thing, because I started my writing career as a poet. And then initially I thought I could just take my poems and turn them into songs. And I realized that they didn't work. I think that's the kind of thing you're talking about. Like if you have a poem, especially like an epic poem, it doesn't necessarily translate to a song form. You have to adjust it to make it work within the format of a song. And so that in itself is going to change it. It can't be exactly what it was. It has to evolve, right?
Yes, because at the same time with Beowulf, I mean, I love the story, I love the characters, I love the message that it has at the core of it. But also, there are certain things that just don't translate to the modern world. There are certain things that we will never be able to relate to, or maybe certain ways of speech that these characters use that, is very significant for them. But if you translate it, it loses that extra layer of meaning. And that's the issue with translation as well as adaptation, because Beowulf is Old English. So when I'm putting it on stage, it inherently goes through a translation because I'm turning it into a modern English musical.
Yeah, and so that you end up losing that original intent, because you could be a purist and say, well, I have to do this exactly the way it is. Or you can be somebody's like, I'm a more modern interpretation. It's like, I can take this story and make it so it's relatable, because if I just use all that Old English, no one's going to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And the purist will know it and they'll love it and they'll say it's great. Like really pure kind of canon related type of people is like, you must run into that. You mentioned it. With people say, well, this is the canon, you can't touch it. Or if you touch it, it's got to be exact. And then as soon as you change it, they're like, oh, no. It's like, no, you can't do that. It's like, well, why not?
Yeah. Because even with the Beowulf poem itself, I mean, it's written in Old English, but the story does not take place in England. The story mainly takes place around Denmark and Sweden. And these characters would have lived about 500 years before it was actually written down. They would not be speaking Old English, they would be speaking Old Norse.
Yeah.
So even the poem itself is adding a layer of translation to it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's not even English focused. I mean, the characters are from a totally different culture.
Yeah.
So it's that in itself is interesting, because there's layers. There's always a lot of layers, especially with older texts. It's like, multiple meanings or like symbolic things, or they're not as direct language, indirect language. You get the Victorians used to talk about little death. It was like, what does that mean? They would like have all these layers so you wouldn't uncover what they're really talking about unless you understood it. It's kind of coded language. And if you don't understand that, so when you deal with that kind of coded language, when you're a writer trying to bring it to the modern world, you have to make choices and how you're going to relay that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And with Beowulf, I mean, it's an anonymous text, but also it's, the author was English and it would have been written probably by a monk, because that's where these manuscripts were produced. So the monk would have been Christian, but the characters are pagan. And there's that layer of interpretation that the author is adding in the poem of, there are certain moments where the author says, oh, but they didn't know of the true God because the characters are pagan. And even that is, the author's voice coming through.
Yeah, the voice kind of came through, like making a judgment.
Yeah.
If you were truly like out within it, you would never make that judgment because, like, if you're a pagan, you wouldn't say, "Well, why am I pagan?"
Yeah. Yeah, and it's this feeling of, this is a story that is being told to you rather than this is a true, this clinical, sterile historical
narrative text, like it's got
Yeah.
a narrative kind of nature to it.
Yeah.
That's super cool. But I just think I love things that pull you in to worlds like, you're talking about like Tolkien, like this the fantasy world. I mean, sci-fi is kind of an extension of that. Most sci-fi is kind of built off of like Tolkien. It's built off of like the King Arthur. It's built off the Iliad. It's built off the Odyssey, and we just push it into the future.
Yeah.
So like a lot of texts like this, like a good science fiction writer could like reinterpret Beowulf and put it into a different world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that will be very interesting to see, actually, because I remember during my MA, this is such a strange tangent, but there was one article that we read that was, supposed to show us how differently texts can be interpreted. And it was an article that argued that in Beowulf, the giant monster called Grendel, who is supposed to be some sort of, it's implied that he's probably a giant or a troll, even though his appearance is never discussed beyond the fact that, he has claws. And there was an article that actually argued that based on both the lack of evidence and the small amount of evidence that we do have in Beowulf, that Grendel was actually a T-Rex. And you could not dispute it because there is nothing in the text to dispute that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you could take that and put that into a whole different context. Somebody you could. I always look for people trying to do things that are new. I mean, that's where you are. But I do want to kind of seg into. I do have your Spotify up, and we do have. Let me make sure I have the right song. It's "The Ship Sail Away" is a good example. This is actually from Beowulf, right?
Yes, this is the epilogue song to Beowulf.
Okay, so we're gonna play this. Hopefully, I got it queued up right. So I'm just gonna play it right now, and then we can talk about it.
Where went the heroes of old? Where are the halls of plenty? Now they've all gone far away from here. As the ships sail away, thus we finish our lay, and dusk you won't forget. Beyond the waves they go, where we may not follow, where nobody knows, where nothing comes by. When the ships sail away, sing a little melody, tell everybody of the ones you knew. Long as the song rings true, they will be here with you.
So I had to bring it back, so because that's lovely. I love that. So that's is that you on the piano?
Yes, so that is the idea of it is, the piano is imitating what would be an Anglo-Saxon harp.
Mhm.
And it's almost taking us back to that time period of, we've had all these orchestral pieces, and now that we're at the epilogue, we are actually thinking a bit more about historical accuracy and how stories would have been told in that time, which would be just accompanied by an Anglo-Saxon harp. And that's what the piano is imitating.
I love that when things are stripped back like that. I like when somebody's just on an acoustic guitar and there's a vocal, or there's a piano and there's a vocal, because I think it's very vulnerable. Because there's like what I like about music is like that is like there's not a lot of overdubs. there's a lot of space, and you haven't like filled in like the headroom with everything. Because a lot of times today, producers will like overfill the composition. There's like every nook and cranny of the soundscape has got something going on. It's like you could go and like, well, is that track 32? Is that track 28? It's like there's so much, and it's cool, but sometimes it takes away from like the vulnerability of a voice with some space. And other if you have to play it live, it's like it feels a little more risky because like you don't have all these backing tracks to support you. You're kind of being out there, and you're vulnerable and you're authentic, and there's nothing propping you up other than what's there.
Yeah. Yes, I think that was the idea with this song as well, to have it be more vulnerable than everything else, because, we've seen the story. Now it's time for some actual, this is like the one moment where all the characters and the ensemble come together and sort of address the audience as themselves, because up until this point, they've just been players in the story. And now it's this moment of vulnerability, this moment of conversation that they have with the audience, I think. So that was the idea of it.
That's cool. So you're continuing to do this type of work with your next piece, right? You have a new musical, sapphic fairy tale about a girl with a magical harp. So you like harps?
Yeah. I think I just love string instruments. It's just a bias that I have from being little. I think with that one as well, the harp, it's a bit of a callback to Beowulf and the Anglo-Saxon harp.
But you're teaming up with a disgraced knight to defeat a dragon, which is like, oh, that's a kind of cool. But I think a lot of people can get guilty. I mean, my daughter's like loves anything with dragons in it. Like she'll watch any kind of movie with dragons, a cartoon or whatever. She's like, or it's a live action. It's like, yeah, I gotta see the dragon. I gotta see that. This pulls her in. She just liked the idea of that mythology.
Yeah, I mean, Beowulf also has a dragon, but the thing I've done with Beowulf is, kept the dragon off stage to sort of, all the monsters I've kept off stage on Beowulf to sort of build up the idea that they are this larger than life thing that we cannot possibly show you. All the fights happen off stage, and then we hear about it on stage. But in this next one, I am planning to make the dragon sing. So there's no getting out of that.
Yeah, but that's interesting because I always like that with Alfred Hitchcock. Like he would do these horror films, and there was no direct horror. It was like implied horror. Like a lot of times, it was like you didn't have to see it. They take a really good writer and director to kind of do it without, because with all the special effects and things you can do today, if you just put that on the stage, it's like, okay, that's what it is. But if you infer to it and you never really see it, I think there's a skill to that type of writing when you look at like older movies and books that don't go into graphic detail but kind of have implied repercussions from something. I think it's just a different level.
Yes, definitely. I think it's this idea that whatever we can imagine up in our heads will always be scarier than what can actually be, put on stage or screen. And it's sort of leaving it to the audience's imagination to come up with the worst thing that they can come up with. And it's also sort of, offloading some of that work a bit to their imagination.
I think it's cool when you do that because one of the things about like today that writers have to deal with is like the attention span.
Mm.
Like I'm a big fan of like fusion jazz and experimental progressive rock. And some of the greatest songs I like from like Yes are like 18 minutes. That, if you listen to like Close to the Edge, that's like 18 minutes. Anything Yes does, they do the whole album size. And the same thing with like fusion jazz. They have pieces that are like 10, 15 minutes long. We got the attention span of today, like an average like pop song is like 2 minutes. And so you're wondering, like, can audiences digest complicated multi-movement songs that change like key, change timing? Can they actually live with that, or are they so distracted, so into like the immediate that they can't, get into that?
Yes, I definitely feel that, I think, with writing as well, because obviously with Beowulf, my main idea was get it written, get it as true to the original as possible, get everything that I want to get in, all the details. And that's why it came out as long as it did. And while I think, there is always going to be an audience for works like that, where people actually do want to, sit down and analyze something, because there is something to analyze and there is deeper meaning to look into. I think there will always be an audience who would be interested in that. But at the same time, I do feel the pressure of it, where I'm composing and I'm thinking, oh, the singing hasn't come in at, like 15-second mark in the intro, or like the intro is too long. People are going to be bored.
Yeah, it's like in the 70s, you could get away with like a 2-minute, intro to a song. Like you could have songs that don't kick in for 2-3 minutes. But today you talk to A&R people and it's like, oh, it's got to kick in like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
3 seconds. And like, oh, what if my song isn't built that way? What if like what I envisioned needs to build up? And if you cut it off just for popularity's sake, it's not really what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the rub. It's like I guess I can make the single version and then the album version.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, you want to say what you want to say in your music, but also there's always that feeling of the audience is always watching and maybe almost always judging.
Yeah, because I think today, man, it is interesting because I find the movement with young people wanting to listen to vinyl is encouraging to me, because vinyl makes you have to slow down.
Yeah.
Compared to a playlist, you're not jumping around. If you listen to a vinyl, it's highly unlikely you're going to jump the needle around. You're actually going to sit down on the couch, sit in your chair, and you're going to listen to side A. And you're probably going to flip in and listen to side B, which means you're actually not on TikTok, you're not on YouTube, you're not doing something else. You're probably sitting there and just listening to that, which I think, like, not that I want to put down the audience, but I think the audience does have to participate to really understand an artist. And if you only listen to like one song on a playlist from an artist, you're kind of like, it's like the Cliff Notes. You don't really know who they are.
Yeah.
Like you just got a piece of who they are, and that might not be an accurate picture of who that artist really is if you never dive into their work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, that's another thing where I felt with, writing songs for myself outside of Beowulf, where every song feels so much more heavier, because I'm thinking of, okay, but what if this is the first time that someone hears my music? This song then has a lot riding on it, and maybe it's a song that isn't supposed to showcase every single thing that I can do, but if I don't showcase it here, will they ever listen to another one?
Yeah, it's a single dilemma. You got to put the kitchen sink in. You got to do everything. You got to hit, in 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, you got to hook them like an author. You got to keep somebody in the book. You got to keep somebody in the song. You get these A&R guys, I don't hear the hook. I don't hear it. I don't hear the drop. I don't hear this. I don't hear that. So they'll tell you, like, you know, if you get into the machinery of the industry, and they tend to want you to duplicate whatever's hot. So
Mm.
whatever is in the top 20, they, well, we need to have that element. So, well, if that element isn't me, should I
Yeah.
actually do that? You know?
Yeah, I definitely see that. With, you know, again, it's that thing of, well, I want it to be popular, but also I want it to be true to myself. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, you know, medieval literature. It's a very niche subject, and there's going to be, not everyone is going to be interested in medieval literature, and that's just the way
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
just what it is. Yeah.
But I think that's also true with, you know, the art that you make. And there's always going to be someone who's interested in that niche, but there's always going to be people who are not. And I guess if you try to be too generic about it, then who are you really attracting, you know?
I think it's the law of attraction. Like, in my opinion, I think there's a place for everything.
Yeah.
But we kind of get told that we have to fit. You know, like I was talking to somebody one time. It was like, oh, you know, to get sync licensing, you got to listen to what's going on, right? You got to listen to TV shows or movies, and then it's clone the vibe. I'm like, as a musician, I say, I guess if that's how I'm going to make my money, is I'm going to clone that vibe and try to repeat it and do it for lower cost than this guy. I'm like, I'm not really interested in that.
Yeah.
Like, it's like my whole thing is like I'm an experimental artist, and I like to push things and do expand, you know, expansive sound. I want to kind of blow it up. I want to change things and reinvent things, and cloning something to get like a sync licensing deal is not my prime mover. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the people who are meant to find your art will find it. And I think those are the people that you should really be thinking about. It's because there's always going to be people who are not into that genre, and there's no way of converting them. So just be as much yourself as you can, I guess, with the art that you create.
If you put it in the ether, I think people find it. Because, you know, like, if you get the problem with some artists is like they get in their loft with like 100 paintings and say none of them are ready for the gallery, right?
Yeah.
But like until they actually put them in the gallery, they wouldn't know. I mean, they're a real self-critic.
Yeah.
And you never put the work out into the world. Like, yeah, of course, there are going to be people maybe in your neighborhood, maybe in your town. They'll say they don't like it, but you have no idea. There's somebody in Norway or Australia or Japan or anywhere sees that, and it's like, that speaks to them. It's like, well, how would you know that if you don't put it out there?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And with Beowulf, before we put it on stage, you know, I've been writing it for a really long time just by myself, and I'd been editing, and there was a point where I felt like the editing was never going to end and it was never going to be ready. But then I said, you know what, we're just going to put it on stage. We're just going to do it as it is. And then as that process went on, actually, that is when I saw a lot more possibilities on how to edit and what worked and what didn't. And I would never know until I actually had people act out these scenes, or I actually had people sing these songs. And I think even though when we put it on stage, there was still, even on stage, I had in my head, oh, I should change that.
Yeah.
But then I spoke to some people in the audience, and there were people who loved it. There were people who'd, you know, like traveled to Edinburgh from different countries to see it. And it was that moment of, oh, you know, I'm still
like the way it is.
There is an audience for it still.
Yeah, that's the thing is, like, as an artist, we get to perfection trap, and like we keep on trying to tweak it, and it's cool that it can evolve, but sometimes what we don't realize is the fans actually like it the way it is.
Yeah.
They're like, and the thing is, like, anytime you put it on a live play, it's going to change. It's going to evolve. Anytime you play live, it's going to change. It's going to evolve. So the musicians will tweak things and say, hey, this works, that this doesn't work. And we don't have to really explain it to the audience. We just do it. But over time, you might find out from the feedback that like the change, you do a change on like a 10th performance of your piece, and really the 5th performance of your piece is what the audience dig. They don't really like your new version. You think your new version's everything, but the audience says no, we don't like that. so like that's where it's like going and playing live or doing things and taking them out of the out of your closet and take them out of your bedroom and actually put them out there in the world is the best way to know what works. Any like indie band that's on the road driving in their Econoline van from gig to gig, that first gig, they learned a lot by the time they get to gig 100. Like they usually become like a totally tight machine. Like they really are in sync. But the first couple of shows, they're like they're they don't even want to look at the tape because they're not where they are after. But you have to do that at some point. You have to go out and do it. And of course, that first performance is never going to be what your 100th performance or 1,000th performance is.
Yeah, and I think another thing to really keep in mind is, when you write something, it feels predictable because you wrote it. It feels predictable because you've probably listened to it 100 times at this point. And then you actually put it in front of an audience and they are seeing this for the first time as the finished product and not as all the steps that went into getting it there and all the times that you've played it over and over or edited it. And then it's really interesting then seeing, oh, it actually does work. It actually does have the effect that I wanted it to have. It's just that I'm so familiar with it that it doesn't have an effect on me anymore.
You're too close to it. That's why a lot of times like artists aren't the ones who pick the songs to go out. Like if you go talk to, I'm like a music historian in terms of like a lot of pop music. And I was reviewing like the decisions like A&R made for a lot of key artists, and the artists themselves would not have picked that single. A lot of times artists would pick a single and an AR would say, no, that's not the one. They would pick something else. And the one they picked actually worked. And even when the artist goes to play the song that they wanted to work, the fans don't dig it. The fans dig the one that A&R guy picked. So it's like a lot of times you don't know, like you're so close to your own work that what you think works sometimes isn't what works, and what you think doesn't work, it actually works. And so that's why you need sometimes people around you to help you discern that because they're too close to it.
Yes, definitely. And I also think it's really important to, when you're working on a project, just take a break. Just step away from whatever you're doing for like a week. That's what I do with songs. Once I've finished them, I put it down. I don't look at it, and then I come back to it when I actually want to, arrange the orchestra for it, and then with that distance, it's I see things that I hadn't seen the first time because the first time I was focused on something completely different.
Yeah, I think what I find like with a song, like I like to do everything live. I just record it. I go back to it. I walk away. I live in New Hampshire. I might go out to the woods, go on a mountain bike, come back. Not even touch it, and then listen to it, and then say, "Oh, I actually should move this to this part, or I should overdub this, so I should change that." So over time, I take it like a live recording, and then I do overdubs onto it, and then I tweak it. But a lot of my stuff usually starts off being really live, and then I'll tweak it. It's kind of like a 1970s style recording, which is not really in fashion anymore. But because I do it that way, I get people saying, how come it sounds like it's live? I said, well, because it is.
Yeah, that was my idea with Beowulf, with the album, because when I wrote it obviously on Logic, on MuseScore, and when the computer played it back to me, it was very much, methodical. And then when we actually went into recording it, when we were going to actually do it just on stage, I considered using those tracks, but then our musical director was saying, well, actually, wouldn't it be a lot nicer if you had a live orchestra with it? And I hadn't thought about that because I just thought, tracks are going to be a lot easier. But then actually hearing the musicians and what they do with it was so interesting that is also the route I took with the album, where the orchestra was recorded all together live in one room, and and it when I listen to it, it genuinely feels like the music is breathing because the people are.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with the tech. Which I'm a tech guy. I do software as my main gig, but the thing I find with the tech is like it sounds too perfect. And the one thing I like about older music is in those recording studios is somewhat live. And so that what you feel like you listen to Motown songs, you get the Motown drummers and the Funk Brothers and those guys are playing live, and there's like not a lot of overdubs. And when you have that kind of live performance and you put it on record, it feels very essential. It feels like it has a soul. It feels like it has heart. And when you have something that's too perfect, it like seems like antiseptic. It doesn't seem like it might sound perfect, but like I don't think people are looking for perfection. They're looking for something that's going to affect them.
Yes, definitely. I think as artists, it's, we always think that we can improve something, we can do better, and it's almost this race towards perfection. But actually, I think, when I think about the artists that I like, or when I think about the musicals that I like, it isn't because, I think that is like absolutely perfect technique. I mean, it is usually perfect technique, but it's more so I'm connecting with it because it says something that I can relate to, or it's the way someone's voice breaks just right, or the way they breathe on a word, and that's what you connect to.
Yeah, the vulnerability. Like a good example, like Neil Young has what they call this shaky voice, and sometimes his pitch, when he does his really vulnerable songs, his pitch will crack a little bit, and he doesn't go back and fix it. He just like lets it be what it is. And there's a difference because like when he sings with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young or Buffalo Springfield, he won't do that crack. But when he does his own personal work, he'll let his voice crack or pitch shift a little bit, and he doesn't correct it. And I find that's cool. I like it when artists are willing to be that vulnerable and put it on tape. And then I'm like, okay, but they're trying to tell a story and they want you to feel it.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's especially true with musical theatre because, as an artist, you want to sound beautiful, of course, but also you are playing a character and you need to be true to that character. So when I'm, recording for Freawaru, I'm not recording as Umay, I'm recording as Freawaru. So I need to think about, what is she thinking about right now? What is her state of mind? How does she feel about this word? Or, it isn't just about, okay, what is my technique? It's about what does this character feel and how can I portray it most accurately?
Yeah, you're in the actor role. Like a lot of musicians, like when they go on stage, they actually are playing like their a stage self, right? And every you get Mick Jagger. Like you think about it, he goes on stage and he struts, but if you talk to him in an interview, he sounds like a business, like a English gentleman, business guy. He's very, very like together. He knows what's going on, right? But like his stage self is very eclectic and very. Because I think you go into characters. I mean, Bowie was real famous for that, where he took theater and said, I'm going to make it real. I'm actually going to be Ziggy. I'm going to be Aladdin Sane. I'm going to be the Thin White Duke. I'm actually going to be that guy. I'm going to be that character the whole time. you step into it, and Freddie Mercury, he just bombastic. He stepped into this over, like more than what you would be. You just do that. I mean, sometimes that's what you do. Sometimes you tone it down. But I think I think musicians and actors have a lot of synergy.
Yes, and I think there's always going to be a part of you in that character as well. When I'm playing Freawaru, of course, I'm playing certain things up. I'm changing my accent a little bit, but at the end of the day, the feelings that she has, I can relate to them. So there's always going to be a part of me in that performance as well as that character.
It's the thing that that's the vulnerability. Like every actor that goes into like, your method actor, even though they say they're playing this other character, a lot of that truth to it is because they're pulling from themselves.
Yeah.
And so even though they say there's always a separation, this guy's not me. It's like, well, a lot of that is you, you know. But it's how you portray it. Like it's a side of you that maybe nobody has seen, but you found it.
Yes, and I think, you know, having that sort of mask of the character as that mediator between you and the audience, I think that actually allows way more freedom, because maybe you wouldn't say these things as yourself, but you would express these things as this character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives you a permission. It gives you that permission structure to go somewhere that your typical self wouldn't go.
Yes, definitely.
And I think that's always interesting to me, is like art is so expansive. Like you can go anywhere you want to go. The only limitations is your glass ceiling of what you think you can't do.
Yeah.
So once you get past that and say, who cares what it looks like the first time I try it? I should just try it.
Yeah. Yes, like for Freawaru, for example, you know, I can't relate to being a Danish medieval princess whose house is being haunted by a giant, you know, but I can relate to that feeling of what she talks about in a song, having to be silent so as not to awaken the monster, because and not knowing when that would end, because to me, when I was writing it, it was in the middle of the pandemic and I didn't know when the lockdown would end.
Oh, so you use that to transfer that feeling, get the same idea.
Yes, and it's that thing of, you know, I would never be in this exact specific situation, but I can imagine it because I've been in something similar enough, and I can channel that. And I can put that into my writing, I can put that into my character as well. Or in the end where, you know, she's been exiled and her life has gone completely wrong, and there's this evil person who's, you know, the metaphorical dragon trying to kill her. And at that moment, again, I've never been in that situation, thankfully, but it's, you know, how she then handles that situation of, well, I did nothing wrong, then why am I being punished? Because I think that's something that everyone can relate to.
Yeah, everybody can relate to, like, why am I being put into this situation in my life? I've tried to do everything right. Things are not going right. I think every human being has felt that.
Yes, and you don't need to be, again, a medieval exiled queen to feel that way. It's just that is her situation, and even now, we can still relate to it. And I think that's what I love about Beowulf in general as well.
It's very relatable, because even though it's ancient, it's old. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's not relatable. I think some people confuse that, say, oh, it's like that's old fashioned, or that's old ancient, or that's like a classic thing, or classical. And there's like kind of people who are like, oh, I'm all in on modern, right? They're all in on future. But like everything that we have today and everything going forward is built on the past.
Yeah.
And, you know, history to me is super important. And whether it's like, you know, a history that's actual, like historic, real things that happened, or text or stories from the past. You can, anything human beings have written down, you can usually learn from.
Yes, definitely. Or like something I love about Anglo-Saxon literature in general is this preoccupation they have with, you know, history and how will they be remembered. And, you know, a lot of these texts have there's a layer of spirituality to it where, you know, they think about what will happen after they die. But then there are some texts that, you know, say things like, well, we don't know what's going to happen, but we can hope to be remembered. And I think that's what a lot of these texts are dealing with Anglo-Saxon literature, the want to be remembered. And I think even today we can relate to that. We want to be heard, we want to be seen and known, and hopefully remembered after we're gone.
Yeah, the permanence of the text, you know, putting something down, like with the monk writing it down.
Yeah.
You want that to be not just an oral tradition, he wanted it to be remembered.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, I think, again, that's another one of those just human things that is the same regardless of what time period we look at.
Yeah, I think what's great about artists is that we can synthesize like the internal, the external, like the subconscious, and like the ether or the muse.
Mhm.
So like artists are kind of keyed in on synthesizing all these inputs, whether coming from your subconscious, coming from the external, coming from the heart to the soul, and you are what you're the sum of all your experiences and your influences, but you also have your own voice.
Yes.
And when you've merged that, like you take an ancient text like Beowulf, but you've got your own inner workings, your own subconscious, your own vision. And so when you've synthesized that, it becomes something totally new.
Yes.
And that's the great thing about art. That's why I like to talk to artists.
Yeah, like with Beowulf, I was looking into this character, Freawaru, because her appearances in the poem itself are so small. She never speaks. Her name appears once, and even then, most people think that that is not her real name, and Freawaru is just a nickname, so we don't even know her real name. But then I looked into, other texts that overlap with Beowulf, overlapping characters or histories, and that's how I got to the Gesta Danorum, which is another text which appears to have characters in common with Beowulf, and that's how I found the rest of Freawaru's story. And she's not named in that either. And so that really leaves me with this character who's at the center of all these things, but no one bothered to record anything about her. And I think that was that moment of,
that appealed to you
I
because you
need
want to give this
something
like
about this.
a person that didn't have a voice to give them a voice.
Yes. And, as a creator, obviously that is great because you have a blank canvas, you can do whatever you want with it. But at the same time, you're looking at all these texts that keep going on and on about how they want to be remembered after they're gone. And then here's this character who's in these texts who's barely there at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is her story? Why is it not being told? Well, then I'm going to tell it.
Right. I think that's really interesting because you can go back into the historical text and you found something. So I can zoom in on this, and I can expand this, and it's like kind of wide open. So I have my own creativity. So even though it's Beowulf, it's a classic tale, people know it. You reinvent it by taking an aspect that's not really flushed out, so that you can flush it out and put your own stamp on it. I think and that's like goes again to the creative spark that like why creative people are interesting, because you guys, people like yourself, like you find that, and that's uniquely like something that you picked up on, and maybe not everybody would pick up on that, and that's why it's interesting.
Yes, and I think with musicals as well, it's because it's so character driven. I can't just have one narrator character who's singing every single song, because then that's boring. We need to hear from these characters. So if we need to hear from these characters, they need to have distinct voices. And if I can't find it in the text, I need to give it to them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think that's awesome. Well, we always hit our hour faster than we ever think if we actually hit the hour again. But we do have your QR code. If people want to scan that will go right to your WordPress website. And if people click on that WordPress site, what do they find there?
So there is all my music, all my live performances, links to my live performance videos, videos from Beowulf, even the songs from when I was first writing it and the initial versions, and all my links to Spotify, social media, and all that as well.
So I want to encourage people, click on the links. We also have your I believe your TikTok links there. We've got in the description of the podcast, we've got like all your links, but we couldn't fit them here. But they'll all be clickable. So we've been live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Kick. We will be on other podcast platforms like Spotify Video Podcast, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Newsly, and many, many more. Plus, we have familyelectricghost.com. We'll have a blogger page with a landing page link so you can deep dive into everything that we've talked about today. I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I would definitely, anytime you have that new project, the new musical, yeah, we definitely would probably want to key in on that. So give me a little ring, and we'll push that too. I want to thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Have a great day.
Bye.